Pietro Manni was born in Umbria in Italy in 1778. This topic is niche, and there weren't a lot of images available, so I am going to use emoji and musical theater references to bring it home. So, 1778, that is, for any Hamilton fans, about the time of right-hand man. Okay. At age 19, he went to Rome to study medicine, and he made the usual boring dead white guy from history who we talk about at Salon rise through the ranks of medical practitioners. I'm going to skip over a lot of this, but to understand this story, you have to understand the time he lived in. So we're going to take a quick road trip through Laura's favorite Salon subject, dying in the industrial age. I've given like 4 talks on basically this. So the Industrial Revolution kicked off about 1760 or so. It brought mechanization to jobs that previously just relied on large workforces. So it freed them from toil, which mostly just made them penniless and jobless. And so it caused a large mass migration towards manufacturing jobs that were occurring in cities. And those cities were absolutely not set up for that number of people. Like, this is a medieval building, and these are people who were crammed in like sardines. It also didn't have clean water or any sanitation facilities, no sewer, so, you dumped out your wastewater next to where you got your fresh water from. So typhus, tuberculosis, and smallpox just spread like wildfire in crowded areas. Pestilence, oh. Let's not do the 4 horsemen. I've had enough of them. So the belief of the day was in the miasma theory, which stated that bad sickness was brought about by bad smells and bad air, the malaria. Yeah. It also, right? It also didn't help that religious taboos about the desecration of the body actually hindered research, and it meant that there was just a generally poor understanding of the human body. Repeated cholera pandemics hit Europe starting in 1817, and I do mean pandemics. We all know the difference between a pandemic and an epidemic now. This was a pandemic. It started in India, and it circulated until about 1844. Bodies were collected en masse and buried with haste in fear of contagion, sometimes while still warm, which was a really uncomfortable contrast to the 2 or 4 day mourning period before burial out in the country. The sheer numbers of dead people actually also led to a new crisis, because if you thought it was hard to find a place to live, it was really hard to find a place to put the dead. Yeah, I know, it's cheerful. In London, the churchyards were so overflowing with putrefying remains that the soil levels actually rose like 4 to 6 feet above street level, and they were oozing through the bricks. It's disgusting. Yeah. So the call out to the mortuary railroad talk. When graves had to be emptied or moved, the uneducated population saw firsthand some horrifying and hitherto unexplained processes of decomposition. So stories of persons put still living into their graves proliferated. And this one specifically is about cholera. It actually says, keep out, don't touch, cholera, biohazard. Without a reliable test for life, the pragmatic German medical groups advocated for waiting mortuaries, where you would place the presumed dead person until you were absolutely sure they were dead. These places were described as stinking death barns, and you can see all the flowers they've got there to try and cover it up. And there was, a lot of people hated the idea of them. This is actually one in Munich that's still extant. They just didn't want to accept that there was no way for science to be able to tell when you finally shuffled off, right? But never the one to waste a good opportunity. Newspapers printed sensationalist and alarmist stories. This went on until about 1930, to be honest. Because, clickbait sells papers, and it still does. Yeah, this is the stuff I had to wade through during research. So undermining and ridiculing medical practitioners as inept, inhumane, greedy, malicious, William Tebb here, which was another talk, was actually a staunch anti-vaxxer. That was his main thing. And so anything that he could do, to undermine, anything he could do to undermine the medical establishment was totally his jam. Inventors also offered new and fascinating devices to revive the apparently dead, or at least test for signs of life. You saw the galvanized corpse. How many of you had to do the frog leg experiment? Yeah, basically, this comes from that, right? But they were using really poorly understood new scientific principles like galvanism and mesmerism. So this particular piece was basically a chain battery to administer a shock to the face of someone who you thought might be dead. Science! And I actually particularly love this one. This is a thanatometer, which is to say a corpse thermometer. It's hard to tell, but that's actually about this long, because you put it down the corpse's throat, and if the stomach is cold enough, you're like, ah, yeah, they're dead. Yeah. And then in an age before food purity laws, quack pharmacists peddled all sorts of miracle cures, including nicotine, which is a huge, like, super drug throughout the 18th and into the early 19th, and now honestly into the 20th century. For nearly a century, pharmacists raved about the medicinal properties of a nicotine enema, of tobacco smoke. And it was considered very, very effective at reviving drowned persons. And I will note that this particular patent device is actually an improvement on the previous way because it has a bellows. Because it gets worse. The reason that they had to add the bellows was because you could catch cholera doing this. It's pretty terrible. Let's not make that a call out. Different groups. So the other part was that religious figures who were really threatened by science, they took all of the crisis and the suffering and the unrest, and they blamed the scientists for it. They're like, this is your fault, you didn't do better. And they use this as an excuse to drag their flocks back away from science and back to blind faith, basically. Maybe. So it is in the early parts, it's the same one, but thank you. So it's in the early parts of this shit show that we return to our dear friend Pietro Mani. It's 1822, he is now 44 years old, and his brother dies unexpectedly. And although I cannot find any actual account of what happened to him, it traumatized the hell out of Pietro. He gave up his promising work as a medical obstetrician, and he devoted the rest of his life to trying to revive drowned or asphyxiated people, meaning also minors who got tunneled in, and studying the signs of death to prevent premature burial. And that just paints a terrible story of what happened to his brother. His first work was an 1826 paper on the treatment of the drowned. Unlike previous work, he used like the common language, not medical Latin and everything, which meant that people who pulled drowned people out of the river could actually use this information. It was so popular that his colleagues got him to expand it into a book. And that book was so popular that it quickly went through 3 editions. And he was living every academic's dream. A copy of his book was in every city in Tuscany, and he got a knighthood for it. And then he went on a book publishing tour through Milan, Naples, Salerno, Sicily, Rome, England, and Paris. So in 1837, which is about 2 years after Can You Hear the People Sing? Mani gave a lecture at the Academy of Sciences in Paris where he pledged 1,500 francs to be awarded to anyone who could provide a reliable test of death. The contest was opened in 1838. It was called in his honor the Prix Mani. Mani himself did not live to see his prize awarded. He actually had a stroke and died in March of 1839 while the submissions were under review. And it's maybe for the best because some of the submissions, they would have given him a stroke anyway. So let's talk about some of those. So one of them was putting the leeches near the anus, applying specially designed pinchers called pince mamans to the nipples, shoving a long needle with a flag on it into the heart to see if it would wave, and pulling rhythmically on the tongue with a pair of special forceps, which are lost to history, thankfully. The prize was not awarded in the contest of 1838. It was rerun in 1842, and again, nothing. But the 1846 batch of submissions was very promising. Eugene Bouchou, a Belgian doctor familiar with the work of, forgive me, this is such a good digression. I shit you not, doctor and amateur flute carver, René Laennec, the inventor of the stethoscope, which now looks like this around the time of Pietro Manni. So our man Eugene proposed that the patient didn't have a detectable heartbeat for 2 whole minutes. They were unlikely to revive. And the Academy, who were really tired of hearing anyone asking for waiting mortuaries in Paris, awarded him the prize. Unsurprisingly, this brought a lot of anger and derision. Many of the other applicants felt that they'd gotten a bad shake in it. They attacked him in writing. They put in their own theories, their own inventions. So Bouchou was weathering a hate storm that would do a Russian bot farm proud. So he very cautiously revised his criteria to no detectable heartbeat for 5 minutes. He would spend the rest of his life refining and defending his work, and by the 1880, which is Phantom of the Opera, for anyone keeping track, he produced a book on the signs of death that was nearly unassailable. Science, the treatise on the signs of death and ways to prevent premature burials, which that last bit was fan service. Today, we think of a lack of heartbeat as completely obvious because the heartbeat is how you know someone's alive. But this was actually really brave of Bouchou because there were so many other competing theories. The Prix Manni was not the first, and it was absolutely not the last prize offered for a method of determining death. It was just the most honest. So earlier prizes had been offered by scientific and medical societies. They went either completely unawarded, or they were given to people who were like, oh no, the proof is in the putrefaction. Sorry, I went there. And then others, sort of used it as a way to prove that like God's work was unknowable. For others, it was free advertising for their patent life-saving machines, or publicity for their pet theories, or ways of nursing their academic grudges. The fame and publicity of the Prix Manni actually inspired 2 more prizes just while Bouchou was revising and defending his work. In 1867, which is the Civil War, which nobody knows this one, an eccentric French nobleman, the Comte Didier Balthazar de Houche, which is the best name, left in his will a prize of not just 1,500, but 5,000 francs to anyone who could produce a reliable sign of death. And as a bonus, he put up 20,000 francs for anyone that could create a test that could be used by lay people. The books I read called him an eccentric, but it turns out if you switch to different research sources, he's actually like a friend of Mesmer and actually like quite an occultist of his own right. He wrote a book on spirit writing. Anyway, the newspapers loved him. The huge prize was widely publicized. It was a sensation. It had about the effect you'd expect. About 100 entries were submitted by the deadline, mostly by non-medical people. And it just really reminded me of the 2003 gubernatorial California election. You had military officers, not doctors, military officers, priests, pastors, rabbis, several women, which probably also meant that they were midwives and also that their submissions were not considered. Science, yeah. There were inventors, of course, and then a greengrocer and a hairdresser. The hairdresser said he couldn't tell you how, but he would be happy to demonstrate he always could tell by someone's hair when they had finally died. He did not win the prize. So some of the suggestions in this were to hypnotize the corpse, to shine a bright light in its eyes and watch if the pupils reacted, to inject strychnine into the stomach, which, to be fair, will prevent you from burying a live person. Science. Abusing the dead in various locations with a white-hot poker. But don't make me responsible for that becoming a call-out. And brushing the skin with a stiff brush and then looking at the texture afterward. And that last one was promoted by Dr. Weber of Leipzig. He got the 5,000 francs, but he wasn't able to reproduce it, so he didn't get the 20,000 francs, which were returned to the grateful heirs of the Comte de Houche, who had been living in poverty because of the will change. Sometimes it's for the best. A third prize was endowed in the will of Mr. Dusgate to be awarded every 5 years. Contest opened in 1880, but no prize was awarded until 1890 when it was given to another, the proof is in the putrefaction guy. So he really, really was going, waiting mortuaries for everyone. However, the later winner, Dr. Icard, found a reliable but really unaesthetic method. Icard injected a fluorescent dye under the skin. In dead animals and people, the dye stayed put. But in a live creature, it turned the skin bright yellow and its eyes green until the dye was metabolized. So the best part of this is that Icard reportedly borrowed dogs, a turtle, and a live but hibernating pet hedgehog, to test this theory before trying it on humans. And his friends' reactions to having brightly colored pets returned to them was unfortunately not recorded. So why is this interesting besides colorful pets, nipple clamps, and general mayhem? These prizes show the human creativity and problem solving and how science builds upon small incremental discoveries and illustrates the robustness of the scientific method. And despite all the macabre slapstick, there were some real genuine discoveries that paved the way for later medical advances. Mani's work actually described the first ICU, or intensive care unit, where doctors, surgeons, and pharmacists worked together in a life-saving workshop that was pre-supplied with medical tools and equipment. He was also the first one to advocate for rescue and resuscitation devices placed near bodies of water, including the tobacco pipe at the time. On the banks of the Thames, yep. Other experimenters contributed to our understanding of how nerves and galvanic reactions work, and actually contributed to our understanding of electrical stimulation of the heart. There were actually people experimenting with starting a heart in the 1830s. They also were some of the first to describe death not as a moment, but as a process that could be arrested and reversed. So the other point is that of the 3 prizes, we only really remember the Prix Mani, because Boschu's 5-minute rule is still used when calculating survivability. Regardless of what sells in papers in Hollywood, regardless of what sells papers, regardless of clickbait, when Hollywood writes a scene where a character might have died, they check for a pulse, they do not pull on the nipples, and they do not pull on the tongue. Yeah. So Boschu's findings were actually quite true, because brain death begins at 2 minutes and by 5 minutes is usually fatal. And that is true despite all the criticism and the trolling, the laughter, the bullying, the sensationalist disinformation. The truth won out over time, and in today's media environment, I actually find that really comforting. So with that last mental image, a toast to the brothers Mani, the loss of whose brotherly love inspired research that saved thousands.